Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Zena, actually the Asperger King, and today we're going to be reacting to the video What the Rich Exit First Before a Financial Crash, Hidden Wealth Protection Lessons from History by Wealth Undercover. Let's get into it.
Imagine it's 13th of March 2020. You're a 28-year-old beauty parlor worker living in Beirut, Lebanon. Your name is Pauline Sama. You have been standing outside a bank since 7 in the morning. Your pay has already been cut. Your microwave at home is broken, and a few $100s from your own account now feels as far away as the moon. The branch may let 15 people withdraw $100 today, or maybe nothing at all.
That's why you keep a stockpile of cash at home for emergencies.
The same tired look people get when they realize money can disappear without ever leaving the bank. If you have ever wondered why some people seem to escape financial disasters while everyone else gets trapped inside them, stay with me. What you are about to hear is not a theory. It is a pattern. It has happened before. And it almost always begins quietly with people who have the best information moving first. And if you find value in this kind of historical clarity, subscribing takes 2 seconds. It keeps you ahead of what most people never see coming. What Pauline does not know, standing in that line, is that Lebanon's crisis did not really begin when ordinary people were told they could not have their own money. It began earlier, in quieter rooms, with quieter phone calls, when trust started draining out of the system before cash did. Reuters later reported that Lebanon's central bank asked banks to review transfers abroad by politicians and government employees made between 17 October and 31st December 2019, exactly the period when normal depositors were being shut inside informal capital controls. That is the part most people never see. The public sees the locked door. The wealthy often see the crack in the wall months before the lock turns.
And I see the crack in the wall before it happens.
Financial crashes are not just about numbers on screens. They are about time. They are about who gets a warning, who gets an exit, and who is told to wait in line. Over and over again, from Argentina to Cyprus, from Greece to Lebanon, from Weimar Germany to the modern banking panics of our own age, the same pattern appears. The rich do not always exit first because they are wiser. Sometimes they exit first because they are closer to power, closer to information, closer to lawyers, closer to offshore accounts, closer to hard assets.
That's why we watch what the rich and the elites do, so we can learn from them.
A crash is not a lightning strike. It is more like a theater filling with smoke.
No!
Most people keep watching the stage. A few people stop watching the play and start looking for doors. Before we go further, there is something important to understand. When we say the rich exit first before a financial crash, we do not simply mean they sell stocks early. Sometimes they do. But the deeper pattern is broader and more revealing than that. They exit promises. They exit claims that depend on somebody else staying solvent, honest, liquid, or calm. They exit the local currency if they no longer trust the state behind it. They exit the local bank if they no longer trust the balance sheet behind the deposits. They exit overvalued property if it depends on cheap credit that may vanish. They exit long chains of debt if those chains look ready to snap. And they often move into things that can survive chaos better than paper promises can. Dollars, gold, land, short-term government paper from stronger states, foreign accounts, export businesses that earn hard currency. Sometimes even simple cash, hidden in a safe or under a mattress, starts to look more solid than a bank statement. A financial system is built on confidence.
Don't keep all your money in the banks, folks. Have some money in cash and in precious metals.
Your deposit works because you believe the bank can get it back.
And crypto.
A currency works because you believe others will take it tomorrow. A bond works because you believe the borrower can pay. The moment that belief weakens, the system does not collapse all at once. It becomes a queue, and the rich tend to stand at the front of that queue. Think of it like a frozen lake in late winter. From a distance, the surface looks solid. Children keep skating, families keep walking, but a few people near the shore notice that the ice has turned dark and soft around the edges. They step off first. The lake does not crack because they stepped off. They stepped off because they saw the crack coming. In finance, the first people to leave are often those who can read the weather. Sometimes that means bankers, sometimes politicians, sometimes wealthy families who have lived through these cycles before, sometimes business owners who do not trust a government's smile when the numbers underneath no longer add up.
They'll never admit the crash is coming before it happens. They'll lie to you.
One of the clearest modern examples of what the rich exit first before a crash. For much of the 1990s, Argentina lived under a simple, seductive promise.
Because it creates panic.
$1 US. The peg looked solid. A peg is a fixed exchange rate. It means the government promises one currency will hold a set value against another. To ordinary families, it felt like a concrete floor. To many investors, it felt like a bridge into modern prosperity. You, Earned in pesos. You saved in banks. Prices were stable. The nightmare inflation of the late 1980s seemed buried. A whole middle class began to believe the storm had passed. But under the floorboards, the wood was already rotting. Argentina had heavy debts, weak growth, falling competitiveness, and a recession that dragged on. By 2001, confidence was leaking out of the system. Depositors were pulling money. Capital flight was rising. Capital flight is simply money leaving a country because its owners trust somewhere else more. The IMF later described intensified capital flight and deposit runs in 2001, followed by capital controls and a partial deposit freeze in December. In plain English, the system was losing blood faster than it could replace it. Then came the 3rd of December 2001. Economy Minister Domingo Cavallo announced the Corralito. The word literally means a little corral, a pen. It was a perfect word for a terrible policy. Cash withdrawals were limited to 250 pesos or dollars a week. The aim was to stop the run on the banks. But when a government says your money is still there while also telling you that you cannot have it, the illusion breaks. The bridge you trusted turns out to be painted cardboard. The human stories make the pattern impossible to ignore. BBC interviewed Karina Echegaray, a journalist in Buenos Aires, who remembered that exact date because she and her family were buying a flat when the decree hit. Within hours, the savings meant for their home were trapped. Long lines formed outside banks. People knocked on locked doors. Nobody answered. What it looked
Don't be
like
one
a
of
normal
those
middle-class
people,
life suddenly felt
folks. Be
like a maze
smarter
with
with
the walls
your
moving
money
inward.
and that.
By 20th of December, some 40 people had died in clashes with police. Riots spread. Supermarkets were looted. President Fernando de la Rua fled the
Stock up
presidential
on
palace by
food
helicopter.
and water and other
Within weeks,
resources
Argentina
too.
defaulted on
That's
about
a good way of
$141 billion
insurance
of debt.
against
At the time, the largest sovereign
financial
default in history.
crashes.
Now, here is where it gets interesting. Not everyone was hurt in the same way. Businesswoman Michaela Restano told the BBC she had a small amount saved in US dollars when the meltdown began. With about $6,000, she paid off her mortgage. Same country, same crisis, same fear in the air, but a different position in the system. She held dollars, not just pesos. She moved quickly. She used a hard asset claim to erase a hard liability. That is a technical way of saying she used strong money to kill a debt before the storm got worse.
She's a smart
Others were
lady
not so
doing that.
Karina Echegaray said the lump sum that was supposed to buy a flat later bought only a car. The money came back, but after devaluation and inflation had chewed through it like moths through cloth. And that is the key mechanism. The rich and the experienced often exit local money first. Not because paper bills are evil, but because a weak currency and a weak banking system can trap ordinary people
Yeah.
at the same time.
Don't
If your
get
salary is
trapped.
paid in the local currency, your savings set in local banks, your mortgage is fixed to another standard, and your life is tied to your city, then your options are narrow. Wealth
Yeah.
widens options. Wealth buys time. Wealth buys
Money
legal
is
advice.
freedom,
Wealth buys a
folks.
second bank account in another country, or a safe full of dollars.
Having
or the
money,
act
that
early because
is.
you can survive looking paranoid for a few months. By the time the public panic became visible in Argentina, many of the quiet exits had already happened. Some had moved into dollars, some had moved money abroad, some had shifted into shares because, as economists later noted, Argentine stocks surged after the Corralito because trapped deposits could be
Diversify
converted
your
into something
financial
that still had a chance of
portfolios,
holding value.
folks. Don't
That is
just
one of the strange
depend on
truths of crisis.
cash
People do not always run toward safety.
and
Sometimes
debit.
they run away from the trap. A caged bird does not ask whether the open window is comfortable. It only asks whether it is open. Here is something I want you to think about before we go further. If your life savings were sitting in one bank, in one country,
Don't
under
do
one set
that.
of political
Stupid.
promises, what would you try to rescue first? The currency, the account, or your access to it? Drop your answer in the comments. Seriously. Because
I take
what I am
all
about
my
to show
money
you
out of
next
the
is the part of
account.
this story that most people never hear. And it changes everything. Go to Cyprus in March 2013, a small island, a banking system swollen far beyond the size of the local economy, years of easy money, heavy exposure to Greek debt, a reputation as an offshore financial hub. On the surface, the place still looked like Europe. Cafes were open.
Oh, really?
Shops still sold clothes and jewelry. Tourists still saw blue water and bright sun. But inside the banks, the arithmetic had already turned vicious. When Greece restructured its debt in 2012, Cypriot banks took deep losses. That blew holes in their balance sheets. A balance sheet is just the bank's financial body. What it owns, what it owes, and whether the two still match. In Cyprus, they no longer matched. The country
That's
needed a
not
bailout
good.
worth 10 billion euros from international lenders. But this time, unlike many earlier rescues in Europe, depositors would be forced to pay part of the price. That made Cyprus historic. It became the first major Eurozone case where large bank depositors were hit directly in what became known as a bail-in. A bail-in means the bank is rescued by taking losses from its own creditors rather than from taxpayers. If you had more than 100,000 euros in the wrong place, Your cash was no longer cash. It was emergency fuel for the rescue. The banks shut for almost 2 weeks. When they reopened, capital controls arrived with them. Reuters reported a €300 daily withdrawal limit. Checks could not be cashed. People leaving the island could take only up to €1,000 in cash. That detail matters. A financial crash often reveals its true nature not when prices fall, but when movement stops. Movement is freedom. Freedom to withdraw.
Yes, it is.
Freedom to transfer. Freedom to leave. Once movement is restricted, your wealth becomes local, even if the numbers on the screen still say euros. The losses were brutal. Reuters later reported that at Laiki Bank alone, about €3.4 billion in deposits
That's a
were
lot of
wiped out,
money.
leaving savers with at most €100,000, the insured threshold. At Bank of Cyprus, deposits above €100,000 were converted into equity, and Reuters reported a 47.5% haircut on those large deposits, while earlier reporting described effective losses around 60%. Think about what that means in plain language. Someone with €1 million in a bank did not simply become a little poor. A large part of what they thought was cash turned into a risky bet on the survival of the very bank that had just failed them. And then came the ordinary voices. Tryphonas Neocleus, a clothes shop owner in Nicosia, told Reuters, "Cyprus was paradise and they've turned it into hell." Pantelis Panayotou, a 70-year-old jeweler, said people were numb. Students protested outside Parliament. Bank workers feared job cuts and pension losses. Shop owners expected customers to spend only on food and necessities after 15 days of deprivation. This is how a bank failure spreads into the street. It begins in ledgers. It ends in empty shops. What did the wealthy exit first here? They exited concentration. They exited uninsured deposits. They exited trust in local bank liabilities. That sounds abstract, so let's say it plainly. A bank deposit above the guarantee limit is not the same thing as money in your hand. It is a loan you have made to a bank. In normal times, the difference is invisible. In a crisis, the difference bites. The rich tend to understand that sooner.
Indeed.
They know where the insurance line is.
Indubitably.
They know which promise is backed by law and which one is backed by hope. They know that €100,000 in one account is not just a number, it is a border. And this is where history gets uncomfortable. The lesson of Cyprus is not simply that banks can fail. Everyone knows that in theory. The deeper lesson is that wealth often survives by studying structure while ordinary savers study headlines. Most people ask, is the euro safe? The experienced ask, which institution is holding my euros? And who absorbs the loss if that institution breaks? Most people hear deposit and think cash. The experienced hear deposit and think bank liability. One phrase is about comfort, the other is about risk. The whole event was like finding out the house keys in your pocket only opened one room, not the front door. The money was still there on paper, but paper is not freedom. Convertibility is freedom. Convertibility means you can turn your claim into something else when you choose. In a crash, convertibility is the first real luxury. Now let's move to Lebanon, because this case makes the pattern even harder to miss. If Argentina showed the freezing of deposits and Cyprus showed the danger of uninsured balances, Lebanon showed what happens when a financial system begins to decay, long before the public sees the full rot. First, quiet exits, then visible restrictions. First, the leak, then the floodgate. Or go farther back to Weimar Germany in 1923. The Bundesbank notes that during the months of hyperinflation, wages were being paid daily in many places. People carried notes in bags and suitcases and rushed to shops to spend them before prices rose again. By November 1923, $1 was worth 4.21 trillion marks. At that point, cash was no longer savings. It was ice in the sun. And who suffered most? People whose wealth was denominated in money, salaried workers, pensioners, cash savers. The state's war debt, once measured at 154 billion marks, was reduced to just 15.4 pfennig when the Rentenmark was introduced. Debt was vaporized, savings were vaporized. But owners of productive assets, people with foreign currency access, and industrialists like Hugo Stinnes, who controlled mines, shipping, steel, utilities, and newspapers, came through in a very different condition. When money dies, claims on real things begin to matter more than claims on paper. Now observe what all of these cases have in common. The rich do not only exit markets, they exit friction. Friction means the little barriers that do not matter in calm times, but become cages in bad times. Withdrawal limits, transfer approvals, currency pegs, bank holidays, capital controls, insurance thresholds, settlement delays, legal gray zones. In good times, these look like technical details. In bad times, they become walls. Wealthy people survive better, not just because they own more. They survive better because they often understand where the walls are before the room fills with smoke. And here's the counterintuitive part that many people miss. The rich will often accept a visible loss in order to avoid being trapped in a larger invisible one. Lebanese depositors sold trapped checks at huge discounts because discounted money today was better than frozen money forever. Argentines rushed into equities during the Corralito because a volatile asset they could still own felt better than a bank balance they could not fully touch. Some Cypriot depositors would have gladly accepted smaller pain earlier, rather than discover later that their cash had become bank capital. In other words, before a crash, the rich often exit certainty of accounting and move toward uncertainty of freedom. Freedom, in crisis, is priced like gold. At this point, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. So who gets hurt the most when these exits happen early and quietly? It is almost never the people with the best legal teams. It is the people whose wealth is simple, visible, and local. It is the middle-class saver with one bank account and one mortgage. It is the pensioner who trusts the state because the state has always paid before. It is the small business owner who needs imported goods next week and cannot wait for a committee to approve a transfer. It is the wage earner whose salary arrives in the local currency and disappears into food, fuel, and rent before the month is half over. It is the family saving for school fees, surgery, or first apartment. Crashes punish concentration, and ordinary life is concentrated by design. Your job is local, your school is local, your taxes are local, your bank branch is local, your obligations are rooted like trees. Wealthy capital is more like a flock of birds. It can lift off. Argentina showed this brutally. Reuters later recalled that the 2001-2002 freeze tossed millions of middle-class Argentines into poverty. The people who obeyed the rules, kept money in banks, and believed the $1 peso, $1 promise were the ones who discovered too late that the floor had been built over empty air. Karina Echegaray lost a flat. Others lost homes. Supermarkets were looted. Families saw savings shrink into something barely recognizable. The crisis was not a spreadsheet. It was a kitchen table with one less chair. Cyprus looked smaller and cleaner, but the pain was real there too. Shop owners said people would spend only on food after the long bank shutdown. Students protested. Bank workers feared pension losses. The public mood Reuters described was numbness, that strange calm that appears when people are trying to stand upright while the ground is still moving beneath them. A banking crisis is like a burst pipe behind a wall. By the time the wallpaper buckles, the damage has already spread through the frame. Greece in 2015 made the human cost visible in a different way. The ATM limit of 60 euros a day became a symbol of financial suffocation. Reuters reported businesses were hit by limits on foreign transfers used to pay for raw materials and imports. The Bank of Greece said capital controls did help contain outflows and also boosted electronic payments, but that does not erase what the controls revealed. A bank balance is not a tool if you cannot use it when your supply chain needs it. A business without working cash is a body with blood that cannot reach its hands. Lebanon may be the harshest case of all because the inequality was so naked. Reuters quoted Dana Trometer, a 48-year-old filmmaker living in Britain, saying elite people were always transferring money out, while normal people were not getting the same treatment. Pauline Sama waited for tiny amounts. Husseini watched savings for his children become inaccessible. Yassin's syndicate saw money for health care and pensions reduced to a fraction of its face value. Banks closed accounts. Lawyers filed hundreds of cases. Some depositors held up banks to demand their own money in later years. That is how trust dies, not all at once. First, the state says, be calm. Then the bank says, come back tomorrow. Then the market says, your dollars are not really dollars. Then someone decides, a gun is the only password left. Weimar Germany showed the oldest version of the same pain. The Bundesbank says hyperinflation destroyed the currency's role as a store of value. That means money stopped preserving time. Time is what savings really are. Savings are your labor carried into the future. When inflation runs wild, it steals time already worked. People were paid daily. Traders kept lifting prices. Some sold only for food or coal. Others shut down entirely. Social tensions surged. People with salaries and savings and marks were skinned alive by the speed of price changes. But debtors with fixed nominal debts, farmers with goods, and asset owners were in a very different position. They had one foot on the solid bank and the other on the sinking boat. And this is where history gets morally difficult. The winners in these periods are not always admirable. Sometimes they are simply better positioned. Hugo Stinnes did not invent Weimar inflation, but he emerged from the era as Germany's business Kaiser, controlling mines, steel, shipping, utilities, hotels, newspapers, and banks. Productive assets multiplied in significance while paper claims burned. In Argentina, Michele Restano could use dollars to wipe out a mortgage while others watched their apartment dreams die. In Lebanon, investors who found paths into fresh dollar exporters were trying to step around a burning floor while ordinary families were told to stay seated. In each case, those who held the right kind of claim or understood the legal structure of their claim walked away relatively intact. Those who held trust as their main asset were crushed. The question is not whether this pattern will repeat. History has already answered that. The only question is whether you will see it before it sees you. If this channel helps you think differently about the world you live in, subscribe. It costs nothing, and it might change everything. So what did the survivors have in common? Not the lucky survivors, not the connected insiders. The broader group of people who came through these periods better than average. The historical record shows that they largely shared three characteristics. First, they understood what they actually owned. This sounds obvious, but it is rare. A bank deposit is not just money, it is a claim on a bank. A currency peg is not a law of nature, it is a policy. A high interest rate is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a siren singing from a cracked ship. In Lebanon, depositors discovered that $1 in a local account was not the same as a spendable dollar abroad. In Cyprus, savers above the insured threshold discovered they were, in effect, creditors of a broken bank. In Argentina, people learned that a bank balance was a ration card overnight. Survivors asked a harder question before the panic. What is this asset if the system stops being generous? Second, they valued mobility over yield. Yield means the return an asset pays you. Many ordinary savers chase yield because yield feels like progress. Rich survivors often care more about movement. Can I transfer it? Can I sell it? Can I convert it? Can I take it across a border? Can I use it if the bank shuts on Monday? In Greece, before the full lock tightened, 1/3 of the 45 billion euros that left banks went abroad, and another third went into foreign money market instruments. That is not romance. That is mobility. In Lebanon, some savers preferred investing trapped bank claims into exporters who could repay in fresh dollars. They were accepting business risk to regain movement. In Argentina, dollar holders and fast movers often protected more purchasing power than cautious people who sat still. Before a crash, the wealthy often exit whatever pays well but moves poorly. Third, they acted before consensus. Consensus means the moment when everyone agrees something is wrong. But once everyone agrees, the exit is usually crowded or blocked. The rich exit earlier because early action looks foolish, right before it looks obvious. Converting currency months before a devaluation can make you look paranoid. Splitting deposits across institutions can look overly cautious. Paying down debt when friends are chasing high returns can look boring. Holding foreign cash when everyone praises local stability can look unpatriotic. But history is full of people who looked foolish in spring and prudent by winter. There are smaller patterns too. Survivors often held claims on real output, not just financial promises. Farmers in inflationary periods still had crops. Exporters still had foreign buyers. Owners of productive businesses still had cash flow from outside the local banking cage. People with little or no leverage had fewer forced decisions. Families with some part of their savings outside the immediate weak link had more time to think. Some Cypriot savers stayed below the 100,000 euro insurance line. Some Argentines kept dollars outside the system. Some Greeks held cash or external accounts. Some Lebanese with access to foreign income streams were hurt, but not trapped in the same way as those entirely sealed inside the local banks. Notice what I am not saying. I'm not saying history gives us a magical asset that always wins. It does not. Gold can fall, property can freeze. Foreign accounts can be costly or inaccessible. Export businesses can fail. Governments can surprise you in new ways. The lesson is not buy this. The lesson is deeper and more useful. Before financial crashes, the people who come through them better tend to avoid having every piece of their future depend on one promise, one institution, one jurisdiction, one currency, or one political decision. They do not worship any single boat. They worry about where the lifeboats are. That is why current patterns, when they appear, should always be read with care, not fear. Care. Whenever historians see quiet deposit flight, an unusual demand for foreign currency, elites moving capital abroad, wealthy investors shortening their time horizon, strong interest in hard assets, or growing attention to legal convertibility rather than headline return, they recognize an old smell in the air. Not proof, not prophecy. A smell. The same way sailors notice a pressure change before the storm becomes visible over the horizon. And that brings us back to Pauline Sama in Beirut. A young woman outside a bank, waiting for a few $100s of her own money, laughing because the alternative is rage. Her story is modern, but it is also ancient. Versions of Pauline stood outside banks in Buenos Aires in 2001. Versions of Pauline lined up at ATMs in Athens in 2015. Versions of Pauline hurried through shops in Weimar Germany with wages that lost value by the hour. The names change, the currencies change, the mechanics get more digital, but the emotional structure barely changes at all. Ordinary people usually discover a financial crash on the day access disappears. The rich usually discover it on the day trust disappears. That is the final lesson. The rich exit first from trust itself. Long before the crowd sees empty ATMs or closed branches, the first movers stop believing the promise at the center of the system. They stop believing the peg will hold. They stop believing the bank can honor every deposit. They stop believing the state can protect every creditor. They stop believing the yield is free. And once that private belief changes, their money begins to move. Quietly at first, then faster, then all at once, visible to everyone. History does not say that every country facing stress will relive Argentina, Cyprus, Lebanon, Greece, or Weimar Germany. History is not a fortune teller. It is an autopsy room. It opens the body and shows where the damage spread, in what order, and who bled first. And what history shows again and again is that financial collapse is rarely a single event. It is a sequence. First, the informed leave the weakest promises. Then the system tightens. Then the public is told everything is temporary. Then the losses are socialized, rationed, inflated away, or hidden behind legal language. Then years later, people say nobody could have seen it coming. But some people did see it coming. Not perfectly, not morally, not always lawfully, but they saw enough to leave the weak link early. That is what the rich exit first before a financial crash. They exit fragile promises. They exit trapped money. They exit concentration. They exit convertibility risk. They exit trust before everyone else exits cash. If that sounds ominous, good. History should feel a little ominous when it is telling the truth, not because doom is certain, but because comfort is often the last mask a failing system wears. The calm voice on television, the smile from the bank, the line that says your funds are safe. The crisis does not begin when those words are spoken. It often begins when the people closest to the machinery no longer believe them. This is historical and educational analysis. It is not financial advice. Every individual situation is different. Please consult a qualified professional before making any financial decision. This video is not for everyone. Most people will dismiss it. But if one person in your life needs to hear this, share it with them. Not because it will change the world, because it might change their world. Subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next one.
I've been hearing a lot of YouTubers talk about how there's going to be a financial crash or crisis sometime this year. I kind of believe them, as I also see the signs of this might possibly happening in the US soon. So I suggest that you get your finances and your monies in orders and get prepared for if this does happen. That way you still have money and are able to survive it and not be panicking and suffering when shit hits the fan. Alright, that's it for today's video, folks. Please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by Christmas. Thank you everyone who's already subscribed to my channel. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Peace out. See you in the next video. Bye.